web radio company or its management.
Guys, thank you for joining us on another episode of Life, Love, and the Grind. It's Labor Day weekend, so we really appreciate you being out with us. It's gorgeous weather. We want you to stay safe, so make sure to maintain social distancing. There was more and more on the rules, more reports about how getting lax on these rules is going to have an effect on all of us. They were saying that Illinois, you got to watch out because there's that list we might end up back on if we don't keep proper distance and keep our numbers down. I am excited to join you today because we have a great guest. As we talk about what's going on in the world, and especially with Labor Day weekend, typically where I'm from in Massachusetts, that marked the end of the summer holidays for a lot of children. I know more and more parents have been wondering with school how it was going to go. And over the summer, that was the discussion that a lot of people were trying to keep on top of. So we have an excellent guest. She is the president of the Chicago Headline Club, and I'd actually brought her on to talk about that. But one of the key things is she's also the beat reporter at the Daily Herald for the education beat. So I kind of want to talk to her about what it was like covering this kind of unprecedented time and staying on top of what the developments were with school districts. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. We have Madhu Krishnamurthy on the line. Madhu, you with us?
I am. Thank you for having me.
No, we absolutely are appreciative that you were able to join us. I know this summer, kind of staying on top of what was going on with the school systems was kind of probably like nothing else you've seen. Tell me about what the challenges you had to deal with were as a suburban reporter. Tell us what you do and how you did it this summer.
Well, like everybody else in the working world, we had to pivot and switch to a completely online environment. Everybody abandoned offices, just like the rest of the world, and we all started working from home. Social distancing, obviously. So the Daily Herald made that decision early on in March, before even the lockdown began, to start working from home just to stave off anything that might happen on the state level. And it did. Just a week later, the state asked everybody to go home. And that was kind of the beginning for us. So we, like everybody else, had to sort of reinvent ourselves in terms of how we do what we do without being in the office. So those are some of the challenges that schools have been facing as well. And from talking to educators and superintendents and teachers, it's been a roller coaster ride for them. The rules have been changing ever since we went on lockdown in March and slowly reopened. So majority of school districts, they made the decision to switch to online learning pretty rapidly, and some of them were more prepared than others to make that virtual switch. But I think it's a universal opinion now that the springtime was a huge learning curve for teachers, for educators from across the suburbs in Chicago. It did not really work very well. Not for teachers, not for educators, not for the parents who were at home trying to figure out how virtual learning actually works. And let
me ask you this. So there was no precedence for this in any regard, not in the newsroom when you guys were told you're going to be working from home. Journalism is a face-to-face sport, if you will. It's a face-to-face occupation. You go out there, you interview people. I know everyone is kind of migrated to Zoom, but that's not impulsively how journalism and journalists do things. What unique challenges did this face? Were you able to get into the whole technological aspect fairly quickly? Was there a lot of adjustments in this new reality as a journalist when the Daily Herald kind of told all you guys work from home?
Well, I think we had been accustomed to working remotely on and off.
Okay.
Certainly the entire newsroom has never been remote, and that was just a huge adjustment, but we were also equipped for it. We've been working off of laptops and cell phones in the field for years. Now it just became sort of imperative to do that. For the most part, I will say, yes, journalism is a face-to-face business. We cover a lot of events, from government meetings to protests, let's say, and all kinds of events in between. So definitely we need to be there to get a feel for things. So we had to evolve in the way we connect with our sources and sort of build on the technology that we had been using. If you can imagine, Facebook and other social media, they are tools that journalists have been using for years, but we were so heavily reliant upon those with the transition to home-based work and remote reporting.
All right, and you know what? So I kind of jumped right into it because a lot of people were asking about how it was to cover school. I know working in journalism myself, that was quite, we were going suburban school district to school district trying to find out how people were doing different things. But one of the things I did want to really get into before, and I probably should have done this beforehand, but again, so much to talk about. How did you get interested in journalism? Tell us kind of about your experience and what made you think, I want to tell the story of other people. I want to tell the story of the community. What motivated you? Let's get into that and talk about where you progressed from there.
Sure. I actually like telling the story because, I don't know, it feels kind of romantic. But I got interested in journalism at the time of the first Persian Gulf War.
Okay.
And I lived in the Middle East at the time with my family, and I was a teenager, and so much was going on in the world with the war coverage kind of dominating the news every single day. There was also the time when 24-hour news coverage sort of became the staple diet for everyone. So I used to watch CNN nonstop with my father and family, and it was seeing something unfold in front of your eyes and being able to tell that story with truthfully and with sincerity and a bit of panache is what kind of drew me to it. I've always been interested in writing, but telling people's stories, especially the lives of people as they are affected by current events, that's kind of what got me going.
Madhu, I got to ask you this. So you were living overseas at the time. You were watching CNN. So in the community you were in, this would have been a foreign press agency that was coming in. I'm kind of curious, were you in your community, within your neighbors? What was the take on what they were seeing? And where was that as opposed to, say, the local news in the country that you grew up in covering the war? Was there a differing in the perspective, or how was it within the community? What did people say about the coverage?
I mean, certainly there were local news organizations, newspapers, but the media sphere, if you want to call it, wasn't as diverse at that time. Globally, I would say, but more particularly in the Middle East. I mean, you had some newspapers, some TV stations, but majority of the people reporting on the war were coming from outside. You had Reuters, you had CNN, you had all of the major news agencies working out of the Middle East, trying to cover this war faithfully. And quite honestly, everybody was hooked on it. Everybody was watching it 24/7 because it was sort of unprecedented for our time, I guess I want to say at that time.
And so it's what motivated you to get into this. Tell us about your journey from seeing that this is something that was covering the world that you were living in, to deciding that this was going to be a role, this was going to be a endeavor that you were going to pursue. How did you do it? I know a lot of people want to get into journalism. Some find their way. There's always somewhat an interesting story how it happens. What was yours?
You know what? Mine is a very straightforward, traditional path. I was 13 when I decided I wanted to be a journalist, and the Persian Gulf War was going on at the time, and I had a very supportive father who basically, I think, lived out his life's fantasies through his children. So we all became different things. We had a lawyer in the family, we had someone aspiring to be a doctor, and I wanted to be a journalist. So he pushed us to pursue those dreams, and I just got into school for journalism. This major doesn't exist anymore. This will tell you how dated I am. But I actually joined a program for newspaper journalism back in the day. That actually was a degree back in the day, and it's not so much anymore. Now it's more mass media and other other specialties. But
Mother, I'm going to interrupt you right there because I got a funny story that I think is going to shed a little bit of light on how this stuff works. When as a television photographer, I remember I used to go out there and cover news in the community with a big TV camera, a big microphone, and people used to ask me, this was maybe about 10, 15 years ago, what newspaper are you with? And I used to be like, really? I got a big TV camera, I got a microphone, you're asking me what newspaper I'm with? But as it turns out, they were kind of ahead of their times because whereas I thought it was kind of a silly question, I realize now more and more news entities are doing more and more things. You are a newspaper reporter, but you frequently go out there with that big camera, with that microphone in terms of a multimedia journalist. Is that the direction that all this is going in? And was that something you foresaw when you were studying newspaper journalism back in college?
Well, I had done a little bit of radio journalism and television journalism when I was in college, but I never expected to be doing that on my day-to-day, in my day-to-day job. It just so happens that in traditional newspapers have had to adapt and take their own photos, take video, and I was one of the first group of reporters at the Daily Herald who became mobile journalists. And we were doing that. We were reporting from the scene and we were doing everything. We were doing the photos, we were doing the video. But I do have to correct one thing. I did not have a fancy camera. I shoot my photos through iPhone and even the videos through iPhone. So you'd be surprised the things that we use to get the images that we need. But I think a lot more journalists are now adapting this.
So I kind of interrupted to kind of talk about how the industry has progressed, but tell us a little bit more about your journalism. You kind of took the newspaper journalism course, and then where'd you go from there? What was the journey to get to the Daily Herald?
Well, I started off at a small town newspaper, a town of about 80,000 people, and I started as actually a copy editor for them to begin with, copy editor, paginator, and a reporter on the side. So it was a little bit of, you know how small town newspapers work. You
pretty much do it all and deliver the newspaper after.
You pretty much do it all. So a couple of years that I worked for that small town newspaper, I started out paginating inside pages to the point where before I left, I was putting out page one. So it was a very quick progression, learning in that environment, because you did have to do a little bit of everything. And the Daily Herald was my second job right out of college. I came to Chicago and came to one of those, job fairs. Do you remember those?
I had heard something about those. You used to physically go places, yeah.
Yeah. So I went to a physical job fair and gave an interview, and I suppose the editor who interviewed me at the time was impressed, and he asked me to come back for a second interview, and then just got a job. And I've been at the Daily Herald ever since. So it's been 20 years for me at the Herald, and it's really been a wonderful journey. I've learned a lot, and they have supported, my growth in the industry.
Now, how do beats happen there? Now, was that a beat that you were interested in? Is that one that you were assigned in? I know in the 20 years you've been there, a lot has changed. One of the bigger ones being camera in the courtroom, and we've seen how photographers are now allowed in some cases in DuPage County, in some suburbs, in some counties as well. That was kind of a progression. I'm wondering, the people that go there, is that their regular beat? How are newspaper beats determined?
Well, a lot has changed in the 20 years since I joined the Herald. When I first started, I was given, we have geographic beats at the Herald for the most part, because we cover all of the northwest suburbs, western suburbs, north suburbs. So there's a lot of ground to cover. And at the time, our newsroom was flush with journalists, just like every other media company. And we were growing, we were expanding our coverage area, and I had the responsibility for a couple of towns and a couple of school districts and just a small region in Lake County. That's where I started. And you can imagine, we've lost a lot of people over the years, as many media companies have, and we've had to consolidate and become more efficient. And now people are handling far more than they could ever have imagined. I mean, we have individual reporters covering vast geographic areas and even topical areas. So my growth has been from a regular, local beat reporter to I've covered healthcare news, to diversity, to now education, and again, diversity. I'm now the diversity editor of the Herald.
So talking about kind of taking on more than you ever anticipated, we're going to get into, right after our commercial break, some of the other stuff that you've gotten into, which is taking the journalism that you've kind of built your career on and fighting for a more global way to help exercise the First Amendment. Before we go into break, tell us a little about what your new role is.
Well, I recently started as the president of the Chicago Headline Club. Now, this is the largest chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists in the country, and our role primarily is to support journalists who are working in the field. We have obviously, as journalists, we have the role of protecting the public's right to know. That's paramount. But after that, we also hold very high ethical standards, and we try to enrich our members through training and provide them a support system. And I can talk a bit more about that when we come back.
And we certainly do look forward to that. So we'll go ahead and roll some of our commercials now, and I'll be right back right after this.
Hi, I'm attorney Lou Cairo, owner and managing partner of the GWC Injury Law Firm. Over the course of just a few short weeks, COVID-19 has changed our entire world. During this difficult and uncertain time, it is now more important than ever to stay connected and try to help those in need. At GWC, we have the technology and processes in place to do just that. We are still signing up cases remotely and taking depositions and settling cases in order to obtain full, fair, and complete compensation for our clients. We want you to know that our team is working 24/7 to fight for your rights, just like we've been doing for over 40 years. We also want to take this opportunity to give a huge shout out to all of our first responders and healthcare workers who selflessly risk their health every day in order to save the lives of complete strangers. You men and women are the true heroes. From our family to yours, thank you, and please be safe. GWC. For your free remote access consultation, call me 24/7 at 312-999-9999.
Megan Financial is an independent retirement and financial services firm dedicated to the working men and women of organized labor. Megan provides straightforward, custom-fit financial advice and specializes in defined benefit and defined contribution pension plans, as well as participant and retiree health and welfare benefits. Megan Financial has the knowledge and experience to navigate the union member through all phases of life. Call 708-444-1090.
Securities and advisory services offered through Cetera Advisors LLC, member FINRA, SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Office location at 5321 South 94th Avenue, Orland Park, Illinois, 60462.
Thank you for joining us on Life, Love, and the Grind. We're doing things a little differently today. First of all, I want to thank Antonio for being at the studio, making sure that this show runs smoothly. If you listen to the show before us, you understand my reticence to go into the studio right now. As always, I want to thank my buddy Sean Allen and Sarah Sadat, who are always kind of helping us out. We have a great guest today. Madhu Krishnamurthy, who is with the Chicago Headline Club, is joining us today. She just finished talking to us a little about her role at the Daily Herald and some of the exciting work she's covered, and also how she's had kind of an unprecedented summer in terms of making sure she was on top of the developments with all the changing school districts and the policies to be compliant with COVID-19 and staying safe. What we're going to talk about now is her role as a newly elected president of the Chicago Headline Club. You kind of jumped in both feet first into the pool, didn't you there, Madhu?
Yeah. I've been with the Headline Club for a few years as a member, and seeing its operation and the work that they do, and I'm always impressed with the amount of programs they're able to put on and the services that they're able to provide their members. So when I was tapped to take the lead role, I reluctantly said yes, because certainly I don't know if I'm up to the task, but I will do my best. It's definitely been interesting. I mean, this year for personal reasons as well as professional reasons has been so much of a whirlwind, I would say, for a lot of people.
Well, for journalism in general, right? I mean, you guys were some of the forefront, the Chicago Headline Club, in making sure that grants were given and assistance was given to journalism, that if you keep track of what's going on, journalism is suffering a vast amount of attrition, and COVID didn't help anything. There were a lot of economic challenges, and the Chicago Headline Club really, and the Chicago Headline Club Foundation really stepped up there and made sure that journalists were able to continue their work. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. I mean, newspapers, media organizations really felt the pandemic hit pretty much every factor of our work. Obviously, with less advertising revenue, since businesses are closed, there's not enough revenue coming in. So definitely, news organizations have been letting go of people or consolidating work. And there are a lot of struggling journalists right now who were furloughed or laid off. And one of the things that the Headline Club, our discussions earlier in the spring, was that we need to do something to help these journalists who are probably having a really tough time, dealing with furloughs, dealing with pay cuts, and trying to do their jobs while also protecting their safety, because they're out there in the field. We are considered essential workers, so obviously you do have to go out and report the news if it is happening and if it's incumbent. So what we decided to do was give grants to struggling journalists. It was basically a $500 stipend, but we really gave out about $50,000 to journalists who were affected by either job loss or reduced wages due to the pandemic. And that we've heard testimonials from people that this was a godsend for them, because they were able to keep the lights on, quite honestly, in some cases.
And one of the other things I wanted to notice, because I really took notice of what your organization was doing. I'm a labor vice president myself at a local union, and we were kind of looking for some of the assistance that we could offer to our members. And you guys not only were in the forefront of realizing the economic challenges and making sure that that was taken care of, but also informing the public, right? You guys did some virtual seminars. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention former President Robert Elder, who really put together quite a few programs bringing upon medical professionals as well as journalists to bring about questions about how to safely work in a pandemic.
Yes, we did a lot of that, and we also did some programs on covering minority communities in this crisis time, because more often than not, minority communities get neglected by news media, and I'm talking in generality here, obviously not picking on anybody in particular, but we're all to blame for not covering minority communities enough. And this pandemic really drove that home, because not only was coronavirus impacting minority communities more severely than other groups, economically as well, they're feeling the fallout of that. So we had to also have a conversation about how we are reporting on this sort of convergence of factors that are affecting minorities.
How do you adequately cover those communities? Because I was reading a little in your bio, you cover Arab, Latino, Hispanic communities. How do you make sure that the stories are being told? Do people in this community, do they come out and trust mainstream media? Is it really an investment you have to make in those communities? I did see that you speak multiple languages. Is that an asset in this? How do you broach adequately and fairly and with the proper dignity, telling the stories of the community and making sure you're doing so in a manner that's representative?
I think it's always a challenge if you're going to look at a community as an outsider. Mm-hmm. And I have the benefit of having been covering this news for the Daily Herald for the past 20 years. And it's only now that I have the title of diversity editor, but I've been covering diversity news for as long as I've been around here. And it takes that amount of investment in any community to build that trust. We have a sister publication at the Daily Herald that's called Reflejos, and that has deep roots in the Latino community. And you have to, over time, win people over with the work that you say you're going to do, and you have to deliver on that promise as well. Objectivity obviously is very important, but it's also important to show the story from the eyes of the person it's affecting, from their perspective. So that's really what we're trying to bring when we're talking about, at the Daily Herald, bringing diverse voices to the table. We want to show people how they're affected with everything that's going on. We want to show it from their perspective.
We did have Tracy Baim earlier, who's with the Chicago Reader, also the Chicago Community Trust, and she talked about the importance of having diversity in media and having publications that address the needs of certain communities. We have also seen that through some of these conglomerations, that certain voices that represented communities have been shut down, resources have been allocated. Is this a threat?
I think the news media is in danger for a lot of reasons. We're struggling in so many areas due to revenue, but we're also struggling with constant attacks on the legitimacy of media and the legitimacy of journalism. And, the truth right now is being questioned to a level that I've never seen before in my 22 years of journalism. There's so much emphasis on the part of media right now to just get factual information out and debunking myths and debunking fake news as it is out there. So there's a lot of pressures that the media companies are under at the moment. But it is always going to be a constant struggle for truth to win over lies.
That's a very good point, and I found it very interesting. I was, in the course of my duties as a journalist up in Kenosha all week last week, kind of covering the developments there, and I did have the opportunity to talk to quite a few foreign journalists who were in town, some from Chinese television, some from Press TV, which is the national, media outlet out of Iran, that were basically saying that for their own safeties, they were debating if they should wear something that says not only press, but foreign press. And again, I don't know if that's maybe the stories they've heard, but is there legitimately, do you believe, a threat to safety, or is that something that your members are saying more and more these days, or was that kind of maybe an over-exaggeration by some of these guys who came in and didn't really know what the landscape is like in the U.S.?
Well, I firmly believe there's a threat to safety on many levels. There can be a physical threat to safety because media professionals are coming under attack. They're being arrested in places where they're trying to report the news, and they're being vilified via social media, let's say, or through the mouths of people who want to put media down. There are prominent politicians or prominent leaders who are putting the media down. So there's a constant barrage of attacks, and it's not just physical. It takes a toll emotionally, psychologically, when your profession is constantly under attack, and your work and your ethics and your
Sounds like we may have lost Madhu, and of course it's right in the middle of a thought that I wanted to hear, and what she was discussing is kind of the psychological toll that sometimes having your industry attacked kind of inflicts on you, which is something I do want to hear about. I'm not for sure if Madhu is still on, but sorry, it looks like our feed might be lost as well. So if you guys are watching this on the Facebook Live, this is one of those situations where you're getting more than they are hearing on the radio, because what we do is we work on a program called Clean Feeds, which actually helps us have a studio link and helps us. And we are back. Mother, you still with us?
Hold on a second. I just played some music. I'll get you back in here.
Okay, so what's happening now? I know maybe you guys can't hear. Sorry, they should be able to hear, right?
Well, everybody's back. Everybody's back. Let me bring the music down. I'll bring you back on the air, okay?
All right, we're going to be right back on the air in a second here. This is how live TV, live radio works. Exciting stuff, isn't it? Live for it. Mother, you were right in the middle of a thought that I was wanting to know how it went. You were telling us just the kind of dangers that could be portrayed in what's going on. Continue with that thought.
So I was basically saying that there are numerous ways in which journalists are being attacked right now. It's not just the physical threat, but there's also the constant barrage of attacks on social media, the calling out of journalists as liars, and when they're trying to present the facts. So this takes an emotional toll, a psychological toll for a lot of people, and that's a conversation that as journalists we're having. We're talking about the emotional toll of being under constant attack and questioned about your legitimacy and the legitimacy of your work, which brings me to the point that what I always appreciated about America is that the freedom of the press is enshrined in the Constitution. It is a role. I don't think there's any other profession that is so enshrined in the Constitution of a country as press. So we are serving the role of being the public's eyes and ears. The whole purpose of the media is to better inform people, protecting the public's right to know. So for that to come under attack, we are having I think it behooves us to have a conversation now going forward about the role of the media. What is it that we do? How do we do it? And sort of re-educate the public about, the part that we play in a functioning democracy.
So tell me, how is the Chicago Headline Club, how is the Society for Professional Journalists, how are they stepping up to this challenge to make sure that this fundamental right that, like you said, is enshrined within the Constitution of America, very much part of our democracy, how are these organizations fighting for this and making sure that they are on top of issues affecting it? Are there programs? What do you guys do?
And that brings me to our 100th anniversary year. So the Chicago Headline Club is actually celebrating 100 years since it was formed. And we hope to have those conversations in this year. Not that we haven't been before, but we want to take those conversations, out of the echo chambers where we're only talking to the people who agree with our perspectives and agree with our role in society, and we want to bring the public in. We want to talk more about the role of the media and how it's evolved and why it's important and why is truth-telling so important in this day and age of fake news, of proliferation of fake news. So that's a conversation we hope to be having not only amongst our members, but we want to have that conversation with the public too and open it up for that kind of engagement so that we can show what our purpose really is and what we're doing.
Have you noticed with these calls of fake news, with this whole kind of dichotomy of people who believe in the legitimacy of journalism versus those who question it, say an increase in your membership, an increase in participation because journalists fundamentally see that it's important to step up and realize what it is they're doing? Or is it still a situation where you guys are pretty much dealing with what you always have been?
I will say this. Aside from the attacks that come from people who are trying to delegitimize the media, there are so many supporters that journalists have. We have advocates for a free press. We have people who support our right to be out there telling the news because, let's face it, the news affects every aspect of your life. You don't walk out the door without checking the weather report. That's just the standard for Chicago, especially. Everybody tunes into the news in some way, shape, or form, and it affects you on a daily basis. So I want to say that as much as there are people who are attacking the press, there are a lot of loyal supporters who are still obviously subscribing to newspapers, who are still listening in and tuning in to audiences on TV and radio. So there are people who want to know, and we are there to serve them.
Okay, and let's get into that. Like you said, there's a group of people who are very fundamentally loyal to the institution of great journalism. If you listen to the show Life, Love, and the Grind, or follow us on our social media, Media Essential Workers, you know that we're dedicated to telling the story of this institution. But as with any human institution, there's always kind of that flexibility to do what you're doing better, to re-examine and revisit how you do things and do it in a more inclusive manner. We've had conversations about diversity and making sure that, like you were saying earlier, Madhu, that communities of color are covered, that certain communities that haven't gotten the spotlight get the spotlight, receive the spotlight they deserve. And that brings us to diversity in the newsroom. And that's a question that I know that I want to explore, and I know that the Chicago Headline Club has done a lot to try to also foster, and that's something that I want to ask you about. I'll give you a moment to think about it right after these commercial breaks.
Thank you.
Life, Love, and the Grind is proudly sponsored by Rich Lewandowski and our friends at Breaker Press. Do you want me to just play this one spot or the Imagine Radio? We're a third-generation family-owned business that has been helping win since 1976. We've been involved in hundreds of winning elections, and we get our printed materials to you on time and on budget every time. Whether you're running for the courthouse or the White House, we'll take you from concept to design and from print to mail or your supporters' front yards. Breaker Press can help you reach the voters you need. Call Rich at 773-852-5733 or email rich@breakerpress.com. For all of your political printing needs, visit us at breakerpress.com.
Megan Financial is an independent retirement and financial services firm dedicated to the working men and women of organized labor. Megan provides straightforward, custom-fit financial advice and specializes in defined benefit and defined contribution pension plans, as well as participant and retiree health and welfare.
30 seconds.
Financial has the knowledge and experience to navigate the union member through all phases of life. Call 708-444-1090.
Securities and advisory services offered through Cetera Advisors LLC, member FINRA, SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Office location at 5321 South 94th Avenue, Orland Park, Illinois, 60462.
Raza Siddiqui with Life, Love, and the Grind. Sean Allen is sitting this one out, and Sar Sadat producing from behind the scenes here. We're joined by Madhu Krishnamurthy, who you've probably seen that name in the bylines at the Daily Herald. She is the education reporter there. We're talking to her in her capacity as the president of the Chicago Headline Club. And Madhu, you're actually going to hear a story that I bring up quite a bit because it still perplexes me how this was the case. With the investigation and the shooting with Laquan McDonald, it wasn't any of these multi-million-dollar corporation-owned media outlets that exposed this. It was a freelance. It was basically a freelance journalist. I believe it was Brandon Smith, I think. I throw that out there, but it was a freelance journalist who exposed this, and it always had me wondering, with the investment that should be happening with journalism to be able to undercover what's happening in their community, it doesn't always happen. How do we make sure, and how do we guarantee that that communities get kind of the spotlight they deserve by the media that covers their communities? And hopefully Madhu will be joining us again soon. It looks like she may actually be offline at the moment. But again, we're joined by Madhu, and I just want to, and if you're watching this on the live stream, Sarah is kind of troubleshooting with us here. But again, there's a lot that comes on when we're trying to figure out, as journalists, how we cover stories. I'll give you my personal experience while Sarah tries to get Madhu back, that in my week in Kenosha, I was given the opportunity to talk to a lot of people who had very different views on journalism. They were talking about how either they completely were engaged with what was going on, or that they felt that there was biases. And again, a lot of times these discussions, when we're out there covering the stories, maybe not the best time to have it, but these forums, when we're not in the middle of it, is oftentimes a better time to have that discussion, which I would love to have as soon as we can get Madhu back on the on the call.
I'm back on.
Madhu, I love that you're back on because again, and I don't know how much you heard before you got cut off, but what I did want to ask is, how do we make sure that a big situation like with Laquan McDonald, that the mainstream media, the media that we're trusting, that are out there, are the ones that are investing in covering this? What's the process to get that going?
I mean, one of the goals that I have identified as something that I want to see accomplished is improving our coverage of diverse communities and improving how newsrooms are covering them, and as well as hiring more minorities. I think bottom line is, we want to tell the stories of these communities. We need representatives from those communities too, to be part of the media landscape. That's not to say that you cannot cover a community if you're not from there, but I think if you get unique insights into any group, if you have more people from that group represented as part of your staff, or if you have good sources. One of the things that we've tried to accomplish with the Daily Herald is just have good sources from all communities. Whether or not our newsroom is diverse, we still value that source building in minority communities, because mainly it's to get people to trust you. And when you build that relationship and you tell their positive stories, they will be there to assist you when you have negative stories to tell. There is a sort of a mutual respect that you have to exchange, and not just be in these communities when crisis occurs. You got to be there all the time. It's what we do with any other majority community. So it's the way we are present, and it's the way we are perhaps listening to their stories and telling their stories that needs to change and evolve.
How do you make sure that you get these sources? Getting sources sounds like something that's important, but also sounds like something that could potentially be difficult. What kind of investment within the communities would be required to make sure that this happens?
I think it takes a lot of investment of time on the part of the individual journalists. A news media organization is only as strong as the people who are on the front lines reporting, who are in the communities, who see people every day, and they're the ones who do the source building. And to be honest, there are a lot of sources that we don't necessarily tap into enough. I think too often the media, we have resorted to using only official sources and relying only on official sources to give us the news or bring us the news. And that's really not the way we need to move forward. I think the way forward is, getting to know those communities in person, whether it's the leaders of those communities, whether it's faith leaders or community activists. We really need to be getting to know more of the people on the ground. And it's an ongoing thing. It's not something you just accomplish. I think it's an ongoing effort on our part to build that trust.
Tell me how the Chicago Headline Club in general is helping to step forward to do this. Is it more philosophical discussion? Is it more practical applications? How does the society see itself helping the institution of journalism and trying to fight for its protections of First Amendment by advocating these issues?
Well, our primary role is to support journalists who are in the field. So we want to be able to facilitate those conversations about how we are representing communities of color and how we are doing our jobs. So it really is in a more of a supportive role, but we're also pushing the ethical standards that are required of journalists these days, because we are constantly being questioned about our motives, our objectives, and I think that it behooves us to as journalists educate the public once more about why we are there and what job we are there to do. And we're not just there when crisis happens, and we're not just there for the salacious headlines or scandalous news, but we are there for when the good and the bad and the ugly happens in the community. We're there for all of it.
And I think as someone in the field, and I'm sure you've seen this too, I think sometimes in delivering the good, the bad, and the ugly, sometimes we are kind of the messenger, or we're viewed as it, and not always loved because of that. But again, that's something that that's our obligation. It's incumbent on journalists to get the story out there, whether you're going to love or hate them for doing so.
Right. I think objectivity is something that people forget, that we are trying to present all sides of an argument, in one way or the other, whether it is in the same story or whether it's in a series of stories. We are trying to get to all sides of a story as much as possible as journalists, and it's on us if we don't do that in a fair manner. But there are situations where a story is going to be heavily weighted toward one thing or the other. If you look at the pandemic, there are some significant news stories coming out of there with respect to the communities of color, with respect to minority communities, and that doesn't mean we're showing favoritism to any one group over the other. We're just reporting where the news is actually impacting the most people. Like covering protests, for example. I mean, the journalists have a job to be there to cover protests and show exactly what is going on. But to be vilified for doing that, that's our job. We have to show whatever is happening, no matter who's protesting about what. We have to be there to document it, because we're also recorders of history. People have to remember that this is a very unique time in our history, and we are recording it as journalists every day with the pandemic. This is a 100-year pandemic, and we're recording, just some incredible changes happening in society, in people's perceptions of the role of news and news deliverers, if you want to call us that.
Well, absolutely. Well, I do want to get back into the Chicago Headline Club. I'm sure the way that the pandemic has changed the way everything happens. Clearly, there were events that are not going to take place, but I do want to give you an opportunity to showcase any sort of events, presentations, anything that the Headline Club is doing that you'd like to give a little bit of publicity or a little bit of information about, as we have a couple minutes left. So please do share anything that you think would be important for our listeners to know.
So a couple of events that the Headline Club annually organizes. We do have an event called the FOIA Fest, which essentially is helping give journalists the tools to get information out of government sources, official sources, helping them to decipher it and make sense of it for the average public. So we have a whole day-long program of that we have in the spring. We also have something called the Whistleblower Awards, and it's basically recognizing the excellent journalism that's being done in the Chicago market. And, we have newspapers and media organizations, television, radio, online, everybody submitting dozens of articles that get judged, and then we award the people who are excelling in their particular sphere of specialty. So that's another program we have in May. Now, obviously, all of our programs have switched to an online format now. So in the coming months, we hope to be rolling out programs on a regular basis, but it'll mostly be on Zoom because, let's face it, nobody's meeting anywhere these days. So we will be having a lot of virtual programs and having conversations on some of the topics we've touched on over here, talking about the role of news media, talking about what we do as journalists and helping people see what we do and how, as essential workers, we are crucial for the workings of society. So we're going to be having a lot of those conversations, and we're also going to be talking about how minority communities are covered. That is something that personally I have an interest in pursuing, because I do think minority communities have been ignored in some cases, or just not been tapped into for the great stories that are there to tell about their lives and what and how people are affected by everything that's happening in this world.
And again, if you listen to this and kind of support the mission that the Chicago Headline Club puts out there, just a quick reminder to probably visit the Chicago Headline Club Foundation, which actually is where you can kind of donate to help fund these things. I do want to ask you this real quick, Madhu. FOIA Fest, is that open just to journalists who are involved in the organization, or if we have someone who's listening who wants to find out a little bit more about their neighbor or is just curious in general, is that something they can listen to? Go on.
It's actually open to non-journalists. It's not just very exclusively. Obviously, it is a tool for journalists for them to better their craft.
Sarah, sign me up. Sign me up. but it is open to everyone.
But it is open to everybody. It's open to the general public to see how we do the news and how we can do a better job. I mean, that's always the focus. And you asked me earlier about how can we do a better job. This is a constant conversation that journalists are having about, I don't think there are many professions out there where you put yourself out there every single day to be criticized by everybody in the world. But we do as journalists. We write the news, we report it, and then we take the hit if we are wrong. But we're also out there trying to tell the truth and push, a fair and objective reporting of what is happening in our world. And that's ultimately the goal.
Well, I want to thank you very much for coming on, telling us a little about what Chicago Headline Club. Again, this is Madhu Krishnamurthy. You can read her writings at the Daily Herald. She frequently covers the education beat, so make sure to read that. We are more and more reliant on this, trying to find out what's happening with local school districts. I also want to very much thank both Antonio and Nikos, who are at the station, who are making sure that this runs smoothly as we're going. And Sarah's mouthing something. I'm not sure if she has something she wants to say.
Happy Labor Day!
Happy Labor Day. Sarah, thank you.
Happy Labor Day weekend. Thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak about these issues that are very important.
And thank you very much for joining us. And thank you guys for listening. We enjoy you sharing your Labor Day weekend with us. And as always, thank you for listening to Life, Love, and the Grind.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.